program. Thanks everyone for joining this program. Also to commemorate the World Environment Day and the Sustainability Speak Series Talk 7 of the Madras Chamber. But just before we get into the program, I request all of you to observe a 30-second silence to pay our respects to all the precious lives lost in the recent train tragedy, please. Thank you. I request all of you to have your video and audio muted till the Q&A. The Q&A we can post the chat, and if time permits, we can also take the questions live. So just as we started saying, this is the World Environment Day on June 5th every year. We celebrate this, and this is the concept of the UNEP. And this year's theme is big plastic pollution, though our theme for the talk we have taken more on a macro subject, but very recently we also had a urban ocean sustainability program where we talked about the plastics getting into the urban oceans. Before I invite Mr. Ananthakrishnan to give his talk, our valuable speaker for the day, let us just have a brief video to have the message of the UN Secretary General on this UN Environment Day. Can we have the video, Ma'am?
This World Environment Day is a call to beat plastic pollution. Every year, over 400 million tons of plastic is produced worldwide, 1/3 of which is used just once. Every day, the equivalent of over 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic is dumped into our oceans, rivers and lakes. The consequences are catastrophic. Microplastics find their way into the food we eat, the water we drink and the air we breathe. Plastic is made from fossil fuels. The more plastic we produce, the more fossil fuel we burn, and the worse we make the climate crisis. But we have solutions. Last year, the global community began negotiating a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution. This is a promising first step, but we need all hands on deck.
We want Global Plastics Treaty!
A new report by the UN Environment Programme shows that we can reduce plastic pollution by 80% by 2040 if we act now to reuse, recycle, reorient and diversify away from plastics. We must work as one, governments, companies and consumers alike, to break our addiction to plastics, champion zero waste and build a truly circular economy. Together, let us share a cleaner, healthier and more sustainable future for all.
It's a bit silent now.
Yeah, probably she's gone on to mute or something.
Okay, that is mute. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. So I said the video had been a little scary when we started seeing that, and I think cities like Chennai definitely have to owe some responsibility to that kind of a situation, and that's why we are here today to listen to Mr. Ananthakrishnan on what cities can do to combat the climate change, which is absolutely essential. As it is always said that if humanity is to live for a long time, you have to think like the earth, act as the earth and be the earth itself, because that is what we are. So let me now invite Mr. Ananthakrishnan to give the talk on this very interesting topic, and let me briefly introduce him before I invite him to give his lecture. He has over 36 years of experience, and he's in this field and in the international development arena, and he is currently the Secretary General of the Urban Economy Forum, Toronto. And he had worked with the UN in Nairobi, Kenya, UNEP and UN Habitat, engaged in many activities like youth empowerment initiatives, policy and research, CSR, advocacy, programs managing and including development and implementation of projects, and a lot of such expert works with many countries, not just the Nairobi, also in Canada, in India, many countries in the world. He is also currently working as a consultant, if I'm right, to the Norwegian government. And his recent work includes a consultancy assignment for the Norwegian government, a strategy document for UNIDO on youth employment and entrepreneurship. And very recently, he has also brought out a position paper for UN Habitat on urban basic services. He has also conducted housing market studies in Myanmar, Tanzania, and many places. He is associated with organizations in China and the UN in setting up a youth entrepreneurship award. He is also associated with the International Center for Energy, Environment, and Development, Nigeria, engaged in clean and safe fuel and energy to internally displaced persons. Pardon me if I have omitted any of your credentials, Mr. Ananthakrishnan. I don't want to eat away your time. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Mrs. Saraswati, for your kind words. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's great to be here with all of you, to see that the representative participants from all over the world, including from Australia, have joined us for this meeting. Today, World Environment Day, is such an important opportunity, and MCCI couldn't have picked a better focus than cities and climate change, because cities are key to so many of the challenges that everyone is focusing on. At a summit some years ago in Copenhagen, Summit of Cities, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that cities where climate battle will be lost or won. So he called cities the first responders to climate emergency, because cities provide the opportunities for people, as well as they're facing crisis. So in the sense that the growth is a big reason that the poverty alleviation becomes an important part of the world, around the world in cities. Next slide, please. So climate change, impact, as I said, it has impacting on cities more severely than one would imagine, because the temperature is supposed to be rising to something like 2.6 to 4.8 degrees by the early next century, by 2100. And at the same time, you also will have growing world population, and it'll be double almost. So the present threats to people, commerce, business, and livelihoods is something that we have taken into consideration. So most economic activities take place in cities, and most built assets are in cities, and the world populations will be in cities, most of them. So cities and climate change is an important topic, how cities can handle and build resilience in this context. Next slide, please.
Is it possible to increase the volume a bit?
Increase the volume, microphone volume.
Some of them are saying that the audio output seems to be low. Can you just check?
Low, is it?
Or otherwise they should check at their end.
Yeah, I think at my end, I think it's okay. I don't know.
Okay, please go ahead.
Maybe I talk a bit louder. Yeah. So as I said, the climate change, the temperatures are going to rise. So what happens is that when temperature rises, it also happens that due to precipitation from glaciers and mountains like in Himalayas, the sea level also to rise, and some of cities based near the seashores are indeed facing the danger of climate change. Next slide, please. So cities actually, as I said, provide opportunities. How? Because there's economy of scale. People are all together in one place. Localization, and provide efficient infrastructure and services through density concentration. So that means city can be at the forefront of climate action. They concentrate not only risks, but also opportunities. So as I said earlier, cities contribute to something like 75% of global CO2 emissions. At the same time, they also provide best opportunities for addressing climate change. As we normally say, when you're part of the problem, it becomes part of the solution as well. So I think it's important that cities in the world, not least Indian cities, which account for large populations of the world in cities, face an urgent imperative to adapt to current and projected climate change impacts. Next slide, please. So we have seen that what's interesting is that even though per capita CO2 emissions are not high, only a fraction of what an average person in the US or Canada or Europe does, but India has become, due to the sheer population, the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. It's quite interesting. After China and the US, China has overtaken US to number one, a dubious distinction, and the US too. And like, for example, India has emitted 3.9 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, accounting 7% of the global total, which again then relates to the urban population that grows. There, in 2019, about 34% of the urban population was in cities in India. Now, by mid next century, it'll be something like about 53% of Indian population will be in cities. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have seen that there are so many sources of these greenhouse gases, GHG, as they say. Yeah. So where do they come from? They come from, for example, deforestation, creates organic regeneration and methane gas is produced, power generation using coal to fire, power plants, transportation using, cars that uses petrol or diesel for that matter, agriculture, then urban activities like building and construction, which is also an important contributor to CO2 emission. Something like 29% of CO2 emissions come from building construction materials and the very process of building itself and how buildings are used, for example, heating or cooling. So you will find the blue at the bottom, they actually represent, by 2019, where the greenhouse gas in Indian cities have mainly come from. That is mostly from electricity production, heat, as well as other emissions. That's where the sort of blue or indigo that you have seen in the graph here. Next slide, please. So then again, we will see that Chennai is one of the maybe for the fifth largest city. At the same time, Chennai also has a dubious distinction of being the third, major emitter of all cities in the world when it comes to CO2. So that means the high, at the same time, it is the highest per capita emitter of all cities. Chennai emits something like 47.9% of CO2 equivalent emissions per capita. That means it is the highest, not in Delhi or Mumbai, among all the cities in the world, followed by Calcutta. Then Chennai also emits of per GDP as well, equivalent in rupees, for example, next before Bangalore. This is something that for us the timeliness of this meeting indeed is how do we address this CO2 emissions per capita per city in this context. Next slide, please. So, I mean, what does it do? I mean, one thing is emitting with statistics, but statistics very often also produce results. Like, for example, something like 7 lakhs excess deaths in India is annually attributed to, heat and cold temperatures and climate change variations, So, I mean, which also produces social cost of carbon. So it has the highest social cost of carbon that India has, yeah? So it says that India may lose anywhere between 3 to 10% of its GDP annually by 2100, only because of the carbon that is emitted and unchecked in way. If it continues, the poverty rate also will rise, because the link between climate change, CO2 emissions, and enhanced poverty. So you'll find the poverty rate may go up to 33.5% in 2040 due to climate change. So it is ranked as very susceptible to high impact due to temperature issues and beyond 1.5. Next one, please. So actually, where does it impact? Cities and buildings may collapse, cities may go underwater, but who does it actually affect? It affects people who really feels the main consequence of climate change. It has a gender dimension, a poverty dimension of vulnerable people. So gender and other vulnerable dimension of climate change in cities and towns requires gender responsive policies. When there is flooding in slums near Coombe River or Buckingham Canal or wherever it is, who gets affected? It's mostly women get affected because they have to fetch water, they have to cook food, they have to look after the families very often while men go out for such a work or just sit at home smoking maybe. So the thing is that ensuring women's participation, empowering them economically, addressing gender inequalities is something quite important in the context of climate change, especially in Indian cities. Next one, please. So then there are two ways of addressing climate change. One is adaptation, other one is mitigation. These two concepts. What is mitigation? Yeah, mitigation means we know that climate change is a reality. So how do we mitigate? That means making the impacts of climate change levels less severe by preventing or reducing emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So that is mitigation. Yeah, like for example, you might want to build check dams. You might want to build sort of big walls to not the sea to come inside, or better drainage facilities, rainwater harvesting. These are the kind of thing, mitigation. So actually what has happened is that between 1990 and 2017, the greenhouse gases in India has increased by 176%, So if the target government says we will reduce fossil fuel by 40% by 2030, still it will not meet the 1.5 degree pathway when it comes to India. Next one, please. The India still produces 70% of electricity from coal. It'll continue to do so. And for example, phasing out coal is something that is on the agenda or not on the agenda. So electricity generation has to be decarbonized before 2050. As we said, maybe in Chennai, you had these huge thermal power plants. Some of them have been shut down. It has been replaced by solar or wind or whatever it is. Yeah. And another major cause of CO2 emissions is transport. Vehicles are still run with diesel, maybe some gas or petrol. The electric vehicles are made up only 0.1% new car sales. That means the passenger car sales, because very often your affluence, your status is measured by how many cars you have, even though you don't have a parking place to park the cars. So if you want to measure your status by number of cars, at least use the cars that don't pollute the world, pollute the atmosphere, Buy electric cars, which means the production of electric cars have to be increased. I suppose government has a policy to do so. Next one, please. So we have mitigate. What are the main mitigation strategies? Some of the mitigation strategies. So improving energy efficiency. We're saving energy, sort of energy efficiency itself is a big saver. Just when you go out of a room, just switch off the light. You can dry your clothes in the sun instead of buying a new dryer for that matter. So there are simple measures, or don't run your car running when it is, don't put it on neutral when it goes on a traffic light, switch off the engine. So these are small measures, simple measures can indeed, save a lot of, saving is indeed a gain for climate change in that context, you see. And we should promote hydropower. And so as what we have seen is the domestic policy and environmental action includes protecting, for example, glaciers, greening railway system, reducing single-use plastic. So the net zero by 2017, not 2040. We hope to get to net zero by 2017. It will not be possible unless we decouple economic growth with carbon emissions. So we can have growth without emitting more carbon, sort of polluting the environment, producing more CO2. That is a challenge that we have. Next one, please. So then, of course, we have, what is adaptation? What is adaptation? I said the two measures, adaptation and mitigation. What's adaptation? Adaptation is, for example, it is taking action to prepare, adjust for both current efforts of climate change and predict impacts in the future. So we know that, you're going to be in flood, learn to swim for that matter. You adapt to raising water by learning to swim. There's a simple example of adaptation. So we need to have India's differing agricultural climatic zones. We need to adapt ourselves, try to grow cereals or try to grow grains that can withstand high temperatures. I understand that sorghum is becoming a major grain that we're talking about. And so adapting oneself to climate change is an important way. First is identify the target, assess the vulnerability, then management options. Next slide, please. So then what we need for this is climate action plans, CAPs. So there is association of major cities in the world called C40 cities. Yeah, New York mayor was the first mayor of C40, then the mayor of London. It takes turns. Those C40 cities have been working with the municipality, with the corporation of Chennai, in producing climate action plans. And so it is integrated, embedded, citywide, enabled, widespread implemented adoption. Unless you have plans, you won't be able to implement. We'll be just keep talking as to how things are bad. So as they say, it is important to sort of light a candle than to curse darkness. So we have to have an action plan, climate action plan. Next one, please. So how does climate action plan comes? You have a commitment from the corporation, or it's a mayor, other officials, city officials, IAS officers, whoever they are, and partners. Then we need to know what the problem is. You need to collect data, assess the risk, then you set the targets and goals. How many trees have to be planted, or how many water supply systems have been made, how the drainage has been managed, how to recycle plastic, etc. Then we have to link up with the stakeholders actually. Next one, please. Next. So what are the key pillars of CAP? A climate action plan. Of course, calculating. First, you calculate, then assess, then the climate risks of vulnerable communities. So so that's what is important. Those who are not vulnerable may take a flight to some place where there is no climate change disaster. So we have to look at the vulnerable communities, have what is called as inclusive climate action by engaging the people. Like if you go to an informal settlement or slum area and ask people what is your priority, the priority may vary according to gender, according to the age, according to the place where they're living in. To engage the communities in developing your climate action plan, that's what is important, I think. Even though one may say that 2070 net zero is a vision, maybe it's a vision or a mirage, who knows? So by the time most of us may not be alive even, so at least we have some goal to go. But at the same time, we cannot wait for 2070. We have to start climate action plans already now. Next one, please. So there are a number of case studies, including, like for example, in Tamil Nadu, the sea level has been rising, and it is reported that all the way from the mouth of Adyar River. For those who are not from Chennai, Adyar is one of the major rivers in Chennai that ends up in the Bay of Bengal, near Foreshore Estate to Thiruvarmiyur, South Chennai, to be underwater due to rising levels of seawater. All these places, from Foreshore Estate to Thiruvarmiyur to South Chennai, will be underwater if climate action is not taking place. So what do we do then? You have to have resilient infrastructure, rainwater harvesting, which has already been implemented, or by governments, I suppose, like conservation, coastal conservation. I need to see how public transportation system can be made more environment friendly. So that means, these initiatives actually, for example, reduce congestion, air pollution, etc. Next one, please. That's for Chennai. Then, of course, there are good examples also in India, like Surat. which became a smart city. It has been awarded smart city for 3 years in consecutiveness. Consecutively won that prize because the generates 34% of its energy from renewable sources. Not only that it produces diamonds, I suppose, or at least polishes them, it also has become a city where you have the renewable energy has become a major part of its policy. So it has introduced what is called as a culture of innovation. And that's quite important. So these examples illustrate that Surat is fighting back impacts of climate change and the ability to bounce back from the worst disasters. Next one, please. So then if you look at some of the examples again, as I said, how do you adapt or mitigate? It needs money. Where does the money come from? It can come from private sector, public sector, banks. There are also international funding possibilities, possibilities. Of course, you have there's what is called as the Green Climate Fund, GCF. Chennai has taken something like 18 million from GCF for urban development projects. It aims to enhance cities' resilience to climate change. Shimla has also got 9.2 million for the sustainable development. Then, of course, Panaji also has 23 million. These examples show that there are funding available. We need to know how to access them. The global climate funds to finance climate-related projects, enhance their resilience to climate change is important. The last COP stands for the Conference of Parties of Climate Change. I think it was a Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. For the first time, they agreed to have what is called the Loss and Damage Fund. So the Loss and Damage Fund is for the loss and damage caused by industrial societies in the past 200 years, which is impacting climate in developing countries like India. So they have agreed to establish this fund. So this fund, we don't know how to access the money. That's why it's important to have expertise, analysis to access funds like Climate Action Fund, as well as the Loss and Damage Fund. Next one, please. So that means the government can invest. Then of course, the Indian government is investing then energy efficient green buildings. This green building is something quite interesting because Chennai is a city where building and construction work is going on in such a rapid way that new buildings are being constructed at a rapid pace, where what happens is that we are still using the methodology and construction methods of last century. Reinforced concrete, lot of cement, air conditioning, glass windows, etc., which are not climate friendly. So why should it not be possible to adopt vernacular architecture, which is increasingly becoming a subject of major interest, not only to architecture theorists, but also, for example, people who are building. In Karnataka has interesting examples of adopting vernacular architecture, like compressed earthen bricks, etc., up to 2 to 3 stories you can build. And a lot of architectural examples that we have in places like Chettinad, where you have this construction of buildings up to 2 to 3 stories. So we need to increase energy efficiency in green buildings by looking at what we can learn from the past, adopting the new technology. I'm not saying we should repeat what they did earlier, 200 years ago, but the methodology of the past can be integrated into modern technology and build houses that way. Also transportation solutions. Next one, please. So waste management, recycling, you have reuse, recycle, repair, and all these things, Then, of course, corporate social responsibility. A lot of companies would like to say it has become a fashion that CSR, 10%, 20%. I think government has some sort of a standard, but has to go to NGOs to implement initiatives. But then to what extent the CSR is focusing on climate change initiatives is something that we still don't have any data on. It'll be important to look at this. So same thing with climate finance and green investments I mentioned. Next one, please. So the technology, awareness raising, and financing are all linked to what is called as awareness and education and the kind of understanding. So that's where institutions of technology and schools have an important role to play in how do we sort of adopt climate-friendly ways of living, be it transport, be it housing. Like Roorkee has a very interesting center for housing construction. Some years ago, they even wanted to see how we can use bamboos instead of reinforced concrete steel for reinforced structures. So there are a lot of innovative mechanical techniques coming from these institutions, which I think institutes like MCCI should be working with, their members should be working with, collaborating to promote innovation. And so then I think sustainable practices that way can be implemented by using educational research as well as awareness raising. A lot of PhDs can be produced in this way as well. Next one, please. One thing that we have to see, climate change, adaptation, mitigation, to be linked to what was adopted in 2015. In 2015, UN and governments adopted what is called as the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. There are 17 of them. So one of them indeed is related to climate change, environment. And so the 2030 is the cutoff point when the SDGs have to be achieved. You have only 8 more years to go. That means cities have a role to play in achieving SDGs through implementing climate action. That means tackling the deep rooted inequalities, then climate action at the local level. As I said earlier, climate change will be fought or won in cities at local level. That means you need to have money for that, boosting private and public financing available. The world's largest development bank, World Bank, has now a new head called Ajay Banga. He has been brought in precisely because he understands that countries like India, which are fighting poverty on one hand and facing climate concerns. So he sort of loans, grants, everything that comes in has to sort of World Bank will now focus mostly on this, possibly when Ajay Banga has now taken over as the head. Hope we will see some changes when it comes to developmental requirements of the world's impoverished population, also experiencing energy poverty, including climate change. What is energy poverty? Is cooking fuel. So if you don't have cooking fuel, you use firewood. That is energy poverty. The affordable ones can get gas, or they can get electricity or solar power, but the people who can't afford have energy poverty, making use of charcoal or firewood, which again depletes forests that way. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, of the 17 SDGs, one SDG is focusing on cities, that is SDG 11, that focuses on urbanization, slums, infrastructure. The last census reported that 13.8 million households, about 64 million people, are located in city slums nationwide in India. That is 17.4% of the urban household, which accounts for roughly 1/3 of India's 1.42 billion people. These are forgotten people, or people who come to your memory only when there's flood or catastrophes. Yeah. So this is where I think the climate action has to go hand in hand with how do we achieve SDG 11. Next one, please. SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals, which also means housing is an important aspect, affordable housing, waste management, climate vulnerability, and inequality and social exclusion. Next one, please. So all this said, are we going to reinvent the wheel? Because the wheel was invented, centuries ago, thousands of years ago. That was one of the first inventions, I suppose. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we can make new wheels, different kinds of wheels that are according to modern needs. That's why traditional ecological knowledge can be made use of in the local situation. Like Indian civilization had a rich heritage of traditional ecological knowledge in rainwater harvesting, community-based conservation. Like Vinoba Bhave, 40 or 50 years ago, talked about, planting trees, So many people have talked about, maintaining, conserving nature, and also water management. Water is something that not to be wasted. So what knowledge we have traditionally, the courtyard houses very often were used for collecting water that went into a well, and we took water from the well again. So what traditional knowledge can be used in the modern context? That is something that when we talk about climate change, environmental protection, in the sort of when we march towards progress by understanding what we had from before. Next one, please. And so that means agriculture, community-based conservation, and ethical and spiritual values. Nowadays, I've heard that the concept like Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, world is one family, which means that what happens in Kenya or Tanzania or South Africa has impacts on what happens in Chennai or Bombay or Mysore. So the world is one. We have to link the climate change in an interlinked way, so that whatever actions we take locally also take into consideration the global situation in one context. Next one, please. So the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, in a way, example, world is one family, it is now connected to, I think India has the G20 ahead now, presidency. It is launched what is called as a global initiative, lifestyle for environment. So that means the consumption and production has to be environment friendly, climate friendly, so that less we consume, less we produce, the better we are. So that is why the mission life, it borrows from the past, operates the present, and focuses on the future. So that means what I said earlier, reduce, reuse, recycle. That is there anyway. It has to be linked to what is called as the circular economy. What is circular economy? Next one, please. So circular economy, for example, is something that instead of just recycling, when the very production phase itself, we foresee what will be the lifespan of this particular product and what will happen to afterwards. You see, that's why the circular economy is something quite important, where G7, G20, U20 finance platform that we are suggesting. We means I belong to Urban Economy Forum, as they've said. Urban Economy Forum is suggesting that India's role as the president of G20 has a possibility to launch an intermediary financing mechanism for cities to access financing from international sources, collective sources. So it won't be a bank, but we want to have an urban finance platform. So instead of being a bank, we can connect funders and recipients, provide capacity. Very often, how many people in Bombay Municipal, or Chennai Municipal Corporation has the capacity to write a detailed funding application for climate funding from World Bank or from Global Climate Funding. So we suppose that G20 president can lead in launching this urban finance platform to facilitate seekers of funding, link up with the sources of funding for climate action, for sustainable development, sustainable urban development. Yeah. So I suppose MCCI has a role to play in this. I've been talking with the leading leaders of MCCI in this context and see if we can collaborate before the India's presidency, completes this year of G20. Next one, please. So today is World Environment Day, as we heard in the Secretary General's speech. A shift to circular economy can reduce volume of plastics entering the ocean by 80%. Yeah, that means it has a lot of impact, both in using, because plastics comes from fossil fuel. Using a fossil fuel, at the same time, it can save marine and coastal species from extinction. So it's a reminder of that people's actions on plastic pollution matters. So accelerate this action that we need to move to what is called as circular economy. Next one, please. So here the circular economy. Yeah. So you have cleaner production, better service, collect at the end of life, then recycle, waste, reuse, and green products. So at the production phase itself, you foresee, like every 6 months now, iPhone gets obsolete, or your HP computer is no longer usable, or you can't sort of enhance its capacity. So why are there sometimes producers make products that are built-in obsolescence? That means it gets obsolete before its user life. So that is why we are sort of trying to see how big corporations can focus on circular economy rather than use and throw away culture. Next one, please. So construction and disposal it has to be changed to use and reuse. So it's a wake-up call, not only for Chennai. The Chennai Corporation's report says that the wildfires, floods, and heat waves have been making headlines regularly these days. Yeah. So what's important that the report talks about number of important measures. It talks that everyone has to join hands. So citizens groups, private sector, corporation, governments, and policymakers, not least institutions, aiming at greater Chennai Corporation that if city which may go underwater 16% by 2100, we have to work together to actually prevent by taking these drastic measures, because business cannot be as usual. Business has to be different. Next one, please. So conclusion is that we can also learn from what Tamil philosophers and writers, literary work like Tiruvallur has said. I don't want to read all this his important work, but its teachings on environmental protection underscores the importance of valuing nature, preserving forests, recognizing the responsibility of sustainability coexist with natural world. That means the deep connection between humans and earth, emphasizing that those who protect and care for the environment deserve admiration. So that is what the basic message from Tiruvallur is that, So I think this is not only, this was maybe written 2,000 years ago, but is as relevant today. Next one, please. So I will then, we know that without action on climate change, attainment of sustainable development goals become impossible. We also know that cities can play a fundamental role in attaining these goals. Yeah. And so as you can help lead the way, people who are attending the meeting here, for example, MCCI and the private sector, your work will help to make the world a better place for children and for all generations to come. So I would like to thank you for the meeting today and open up for any questions that you may have or any comments that you may have. Thanks again for Saraswati and others for making this meeting possible.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for that wonderful presentation and ending with Tirukkural also. Probably participants here may be wondering, I forgot to mention, he's a Norwegian national of Indian origin, have very strong connect to Chennai and Tamil Nadu and Tamil, of course. So probably you might be wondering, I should break that thing ice now. So I could see some questions. So let me, Venkat, would you like to read out or should I ask Madhu to do that?
Yeah, I can read out it.
Yeah. So there are number of questions.
Okay.
And yeah, please.
One of the questions is, what are the ways for budding climatepreneurs to on climate mitigation with the waste sector integrated and with livelihood becoming part of the UN initiatives?
It's a very important question. So what's interesting, the one thing is, if climatepreneurs have an idea or a kind of what would they like to do? For example, producing solar panels or producing reusable, a kind of material for electricity or transportation. So which again can produce livelihood, for people. So there are institutes like UNIDO. UNIDO is the UN Organization for Industrial Development. And then UNIDO does not provide money directly, but what you can do is that your idea can be taken up with UNIDO and eventually see if climatepreneurs are looking for funding for climate mitigation with the budget kind of things. Their Climate Action Fund is one way of doing it. And it's also important to get feedback from organizations. UNIDO has also an office in New Delhi, as well as UNDP. UNDP stands for United Nations Development Program. They, even the UN is not a funding agency. They're an agency that can work together and ask for funding. Other way of doing it is the number of governments, like for example, Germany, Norway, Sweden, or even for that matter, Canada, have focus of the development aid focusing on climate change. So this is something that we should be they should be looking into. There is a funding facility called Nordfund. Nordfund stands for a fund that Norway has. I think a number of projects in India has been funded by Nordfund. So it is something that one maybe Nordfund may not provide small funding, but if 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 climatepreneurs can come together, and then it becomes a kind of a pooling fund in that matter, something that we can discuss it later eventually if you need more information. Yeah.
Good. The next question says, are there avenues provided by the United Nations to tackle or avoid greenwashing?
Indeed, greenwashing is a major problem now because there's what is called the Global Compact. Global Compact is it's a kind of a UN compact. It has 4 components: environmental, economic, then livelihoods, as well as equity. To what extent these so-called ESG, all the big companies or producers are now into ESG, that is environmental, social, and governance. So there are ways of measuring how they fit their reporting with the reality. So this, in a way, can prevent. We don't just only say that Colgate makes your teeth whiter, but it doesn't say it also makes your teeth. It also grinds your teeth so that your teeth becomes bad over a long time. So the thing is that the greenwashing can be checked with this kind of standards that are being produced, both with the UN agencies as well as the independent companies like KPMG and other kind of major auditing companies have ESG measures. Yeah, and so this is something that can prevent it. So if you know that a particular company you are suspect that is greenwashing, then you can look at that. Ask the report from them. Every year they're supposed to produce a report. Ask their report. Then you examine it. Then you go further, because sometimes even those who do well may be called greenwashing. But the point is that it's important to sort of pick up the right ones and to expose the ones that are really doing greenwashing. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, I had posted this question on, is net zero by 2070 or whichever year, later year, is it a myth or a possible reality? In fact, I just wanted to add one part to it, because the global fund that you talked about in the recent Egypt conference, will that really actually be made available, or will countries contribute to it?
I think I think your question is also very relevant here, because very often, only about 10 to 15, maybe 25% of the global climate fund has still been used. They are still not, because all these people have pledged, governments have pledged, they are not putting the funding. So that is where I think both the private sector and government, civil society, not the least governments in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, have to point out, you promised this, where is the funding? Similarly, the loss and damage fund is still not yet established. It has been established in principle, but now this meeting happening this year in November in Dubai will come up with modalities for accessing this fund. So we have an opportunity now to either go through the government's representatives. You've got this what is called Sherpa, G20 Sherpas, isn't it? The climate. So we can see how is Indian government trying to put its position for accessing this loss and damage funding. And financial institutions, academic institutions can provide input to the government position. Alternatively, independently, you can also put its position vis-a-vis the Human Climate Change Secretariat, UNFCCC. That's also possible. The 2 ways of then accessing this fund, or at least trying to see how the funds can be accessed. Yeah. And then 2070 is a myth, you may say, as you rightly say, but because what is interesting is that many people, when in the meeting in Edinburgh or in Scotland 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, India and China were possibly the governments who did not want 2030 or 2050. So they wanted 2070 to phase out the coal, because we are buying time. But the point is that, which many people have criticized, others have said, well, we have right to develop. We like the industrial countries. The question is, shall our development model be a copy of the model of the West? That has indeed destroyed, people, countries and nature. So that is where I think there is a bit dilemma. While we are buying time, we need to show that we can be a better student in the class, at least when it comes to India. Thanks.
Yeah, is there a similar example for Vizag, which I live pretty close to the sea? How do I check if I live in a vulnerable area?
I don't have any information on Vizag, but I think there has been a report that has been made on the coastal towns in India. I could send you the reference to that report. Yeah. Who is that? Some Surya Lakshmi, is it? Chelapilla?
Yeah, Surya.
If I could send my reference to you, then you can send it to her. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. In fact, two people have asked this, myself and one more person. 85% of the power comes from fossil fuels. Now, electric vehicles aren't necessarily green when powered by anything but green power. So not right now, we are increasing number of electric vehicles, but the powering is taking place from fossil fuels alone.
It is true. And there are two issues here. One, very often electric vehicles use the batteries. The raw materials for the batteries, the lithium or whatever, the rare material kind of things, they come from mines, for example, in Congo, where there's child labor, there's exploitation. So on the one hand, these are being mined at such sort of inhuman conditions to fuel the vehicles, which is electric vehicle. So that way, the green it may be clean, but it may not be green. So I mean, green in the sense socially green. So at the same time, Elon Musk, Tesla says my materials are produced in an environmentally friendly way, but then still we don't know what happens with the batteries after 3 or 4 years, which cannot be charged anymore. Where do you dump them? Do you dump them like you're dumping all these computers? So very often, I think this is a challenge, but the best cannot be the enemy of the good. This is a good alternative we have. Of course, cycling in itself is a good thing, but electric bicycles have come. It makes your effort comfortable. But we need to say, how do you sort of weigh the pros and contra between the electric vehicles production and use and reuse? Is it using a circular economy principle, or is it also going the same use and throw away principle? So, but now I think, but at least the electric vehicles per se do not emit any CO2. But if you want to charge your electric vehicle by using electricity produced from coal, then we are into square one again, isn't it? Yeah. So that is something that we have to really, but at least it will prevent pollution on the roads of Anasalaya, wherever it is, when cars will be running, without pollution. Yeah.
Yeah. Will carbon border tax help in bringing down the pollution? Your views, please.
Carbon, what do you say?
Carbon border tax, the adjustment mechanism.
Yeah, it is already there, because what has happened is that the carbon taxing, now people are buying. I mean, very often in Norway, for example, every ticket that you sell, plane tickets, it has a carbon tax. Yeah, so which means the ticket prices will go up, but that tax is used to offset the carbon that the planes emit. You see, so it is useful, but will it affect poor people? People who cannot afford, so will it, for example, that is something we have to look into, the question of equity versus question of taxation, how tax is being made. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any private climate fund avenues too?
There are, for example, some of the major banks, in Canada as well as in Norway, they are trying to provide green investments. They don't call it climate investment. They sort of investments in like, for example, that is possible, and even Norwegian Oil Fund, which has stopped supporting kind of initiatives that are polluting. But these banks are a major source. Plus, there are a number of consortium coming together, both in the US and Europe, to promote green investments. These are in the private sector. And I'm sure if anybody wants some references, I could provide some references as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So one crucial ingredient of vernacular architecture is said to be the limestone. Is
Yes.
that available in abundance in India?
Yeah, that's a good question. Limestone normally it is mined from sea or something, from shells and all that. Yeah, and so I don't know the exact extent of that, but that also raises. But then very often it is less energy intensive than the production of cement. So I'm not saying it has to be limestone. It can be sort of what shall I say, a slug that comes from some coal companies, or cement companies. The wastage that comes from different energy producing companies can also be used in that context. And even waste plastics also used. But I'm not sure. I don't have the exact. As you rightly say, if all houses are going to be built with limestone, do we have that capacity? Similarly, we're asking if all houses are being built with the concrete and steel, that also produces problem. So we have to see how do we sort of make use of the available material, its sustainability, and to what extent it can be made in quantity, scalability. I think that's a very good question indeed. But earth, of course, yes. There's what we call as the compressed earth in bricks, in adobe bricks, which I think is another alternative. But then you may not have to use, you may not be able to use what shall I say, lime, which protects. Or in some traditional homes, they use also sort of animal waste as a kind of a plaster as well, which can, by doing some research, it can be made better than it is.
Okay, then lots of actions are included in clean air plans of Indian cities, but where are we lagging in terms of implementation?
Implementation because the timeline, like for example, when it comes to transportation, for example, if transportation, the roads are not made for people to walk, because people, if you don't walk, then you rather will take an auto rickshaw than walking, you see, because there's no pedestrian walking in many parts of the city. So one thing is that the plans are there. There's no way to check these plans. And also, for example, there's no coordination between different institutions of a city. One day there'll be the water supplier will come and dig the road. Next day it'll be drainage. The other day it'll be the person putting the asphalt. So the good intentions of sustainability is in a way very often destroyed by the lack of coordinated action plans.
Yeah, the next question is pretty similar. So with politicians not heeding to research world, I mean, how can we solve the climate problem? I mean, it is pretty similar.
Then again, the research world should be able to speak a language that politicians can understand. The research world should be able to talk a language that people can understand. All these big graphs on these terminologies and jargons, very often researchers are using. They get their PhDs and research fellowships, but it does not come down to people's reality.
Okay.
So it's important that the academic community come down to the pedestals and work with communities and learn from them. And that's why I think they're very often politicians don't understand. So this is something that we need to look at.
The Tamil Nadu government has created a dedicated new company, that is TNGCCC. Can they not help and support?
I suppose I don't know how the company functions, because maybe one of you might.
I think we should check with that. That's a valid point. Maybe we will have to, as a chamber, we will try to find out.
Yeah.
This is the first time any government has created such a thing. So
yes, it's very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, there's a comment. Yeah, even batteries are creating hazards in the long term for their disposal. Can we move towards hydrogen, bioethanol, etc., in an easy way?
I mean, it is still in a laboratory stage. You see,
right?
It's very, it only catches headlines. And even nuclear power, they say it's much environment friendly. And so these are still on the desk stage. We have to see to what extent they can be their production be quickened. But when you produce something, you also see what impacts it will have on the environment as well. Yeah. But these are interesting examples. Hydrogen, for example, there's the electric vehicles. You can use sodium carbonate, kind of hydrogen. These are the alternatives that we have. Hydrogen vehicles only produce water as waste. I think Japan is doing some work on this, which I think is quite promising.
I think the last question is, sir, for a common man at his individual capacity, how can one contribute to climate change? Kindly share your thoughts on a few key behavioral adaptations that could be vital.
It's important that the common man looks at the common woman, how she has indeed, how she indeed leads a life, in an economic way, you see. So very often women do not throw things throw away, either switching off the light or using the remnants of firewood for next day's cooking, throwing away. So to what extent the frugality that is based in our culture, that is why I think you don't throw away after eating ice cream, the paper. When I sort of walking through Marina Beach, something, the people driving these fashionable cars, they eat their ice cream and throw away their paper on the street just like that. You see, the awareness has to come there to what extent simple measures, waste not, want not, collecting waste, recycling waste, and not buy more than what you can eat, kind of a thing, and sort of wastage, because as I said, saving and reduction of waste is what our households, common people can do. I mean, that is something that that is something that we can feel sort of show that we are contributing to the environment. Use and reuse whatever we have. Yeah. Before we used to drink coffee in what says a glass or tumblers or kind of things. Now it is paper cups, use and throw away. From Starbucks, everybody is using that, even though it's recycled. So where it is a simple things, like they say you bring your own cup to your coffee shop and drink coffee from there. And that is a simple thing that we can do. Before we used to bring our own cups to drink water from a mud pot that way. Why can't we do similar things like that? Thanks.
Yeah, I think one or two more questions have come. How can we contribute to climate change as a researcher? And also in colleges and schools, the curriculum, they have to add a paper on educating the future generations on climate change. Yeah.
I think it's education is important, sort of catch them young, as they say, So that is, schools have a very, very important role to play, So before they had a subject called civics. So the civics was a subject, I don't know whether you had it when you were in your school, which means it's kind of a social behavior, environment, in normal things kind of a thing, Now everybody is in computers and science. We forgot about the environment. It's possible that we can from the kindergarten level, understanding nature. I think this has to be part of the syllabus, and it's very good, very important. Like many schools in Norway, where I'm living, you see, they have made it compulsory from the kindergarten level to make people understand the connection between nature and human being. I think, which is yeah. Similarly, I think research institutions could also look into, find out what is needed, go to a neighborhood, talk to communities, and say what do they want to be researched on. So this is something that we can do, and as I again said, there should be a link between research community and communities at large, the people, in a way, kind of something. Yeah. So research has a lot to contribute, and research cannot be a copy of what is being done in Massachusetts or in Harvard or Princeton. It has to be to the reality of what's happening now here, in Chennai or Bangalore or Mysore.
I think wonderful. Maybe one last question from the audience, if you wanted to ask but didn't post it, you can just have the last question from any of you here. Would anybody want to open up and ask quickly? If not, I would request Mr. Venkatachalam to.
Yes, ma'am, Saraswati ma'am.
Yeah,
Sir, Krishnan sir, regarding the GHG emissions, right? All climatepreneurs and impactpreneurs need that basic information. What is the for both adaptation and mitigation, solutioning they are at, right? So I am working on a fabric waste which is landfilled, and I'm
Okay.
diverting that,
Aha.
right, from Chennai landfills. And
Okay.
till, even after having diverted 500 kgs so far, I've not been able to identify the avoided methane and all carbon equivalents. So this kind of data is not available. So I'm grappling around this. That's why I had this research
Okay.
and all these kind of questions.
Yeah. What kind of textile waste is it? What kind of
It's-
textile or it?
It's fabric waste from non-industrial. The
Non-industrial textiles, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
mostly
tailors-
contains
tailors
mostly
cutting
contains
waste. Tailors
hydro,
cut- boutiques cutting waste.
wood, is it?
Boutiques, no fabric waste, sir. Textile waste.
Aha.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
so I think-
specific category.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
what you're saying is quite interesting, because you know what happens is the fashion clothes from Europe, you know, once one season is over, next season other clothes are being like an H&M
Yeah.
or M&S. There are tons of these clothes. They are being dumped in landfill in Chile, of all places. Yeah.
Right.
So there
right.
they are grappling with a similar issue, where these clothes are not made from the same fabric. Some have terylene, some are polyester, some are cotton, you know. And so they are trying to see how do we separate different textiles and how they can be recycled or reused. It's a very important thing. And UNFCCC, the United Nations, Secretariat of Climate Change, they have a department working on it. Maybe I could sort of send you some references in this. Maybe it may not be directly useful to your work, but at least you will get an idea as to what kind of waste comes out of textile, which is very, very important actually, because you know, even cotton textiles, people say it's not environment friendly. Kind of water that it needs to be there, the pesticides. Then after a few years, you use it, you throw it away. So
Exactly.
different textiles have different lifespans and different ways of recycling or reusing it. You see, so it's something quite important, because without textiles and clothing, you know, both for industry and human beings, I think it's quite relevant question that you're asking. Yeah. I mean, I could send Mrs. Saraswati some references in this context. Okay, this is a great point. I think if you look at the website on sort of a clothes waste in Chile, you will find a lot of information as to how the dumping of fashion clothes from Europe is. You know, you might know possibly already. Yeah.
Yes. Recently, the satellite they have identified the vanished mountains of clothing from Atacama Desert.
Exactly. You know, you got it. I'll give you more information on this again. Thanks again.
That's very interesting. We will do
Wonderful,
that.
wonderful.
I invite Venkatachalam, the advisor for our Sustainable Chennai Forum, to say the concluding words, please.
Yeah, in fact, in one of the first slides, I saw that it was the climate change has impacted us by about 2.6 to 4.8 degrees. But right now in Chennai, we think it is much more than that. In fact, we call it the Agni Nakshatram. In fact, it is really speaking the agony Nakshatram. Actually, it is. I mean, so actually, the World Environment Day, the topic was supposed to be on plastics, but just a few weeks back, we had an interesting session on workshop on plastics, how they reach the ocean, how to mitigate plastics and prevent them from reaching the ocean. So we said, okay, we must have a better topic than that. And that's when we met you a few weeks back. We said there can be no better speaker for such an important day than Mr. Ananthakrishnan. I mean, we immediately hit upon the idea that you're going to be the speaker with so much of wide knowledge. You've covered it with so much of data, so much of research and experience across countries, from Nairobi to Norway to Nigeria and so on and so forth. I mean, we're really privileged that we have had a speaker like you who has his heart in Chennai, but the vision of the entire world at large. I mean, that's one thing. And you talking about the opportunities that the climate change can offer and the responsibilities that we all have to bear. And with the opportunities and responsibilities and visionaries like you, I think we will definitely win the climate battle. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. I enjoyed it. It was inspiring to be here. Thanks again for MCC.
Thanks everyone for joining. It's a very, very wonderful session. We would like to keep in touch with you and we would like to see you more often. Thank you.
That's right.
Thanks,
Yes,
indeed.
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice
Thank
evening.
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
And good questions also from everybody.
Yeah.
Indeed, very inspiring, very thoughtful questions. Thanks. Thanks all of you. Thanks all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.